Hello. Today I want to talk to you about Iran. That's a sentence I didn't think I'd ever say, and I'm probably very underqualified to do so. You may even be wondering to yourself, why on earth would Paul want to talk to me about Iran? And you could be forgiven for not knowing that anything was going on in Iran at the moment, because anecdotally I've spoken to friends and family who too have absolutely no idea that anything is going on in Iran as I speak. And many things are going on. And one of the reasons you probably haven't heard is you probably get your news from mainstream legacy media outlets like the BBC, and many people still do. And for many, many years, that's exactly where I always got my news from and nowhere else. And yes, the BBC have mentioned this on their website. And yes, Jeremy Bowen has cast an eye over it and told you that it's just a bit of an economic problem and that some of the traders in the bazaars are a little bit unhappy, etc. But they've not told you the full story. And I thought I'll shed some light on that, because right now it is really, really kicking off in Iran. There is an uprising going on that could quite quickly and quite easily turn into a revolution. So protests began in December, late December, and have grown into widespread uprising involving strikes, demonstrations and violent clashes with security forces. The unrest started with economic grievances, as has been widely reported, especially rising prices, rampant inflation and collapsing currency, but quickly expanded into a broad political opposition to the Islamic Republic leadership. And that is very important, because that is not getting the airtime that it deserves. I'm not saying it hasn't got any airtime. I've seen plenty of it on GB News, and if you read Twitter, particularly if you're in my sphere of Twitter, you would have seen a great deal of it. And protests now span dozens of cities across most of Iran's 31 provinces, including Tehran and Shiraz, and some of the Kurdish majority regions. So the main causes have been high inflation, plummeting Rial, I think, is the currency pronunciation, and soaring food and living costs have crushed livelihoods. This has been reported all over the place, including The Guardian. Shopkeepers have shut the bazaars, workers have gone on strike, and essential sectors such as oil and services, big sectors in Iran, have seen huge walkouts, which has crippled the economy even further. But it's not just this, because we are seeing political and social discontent. Slogans against the theocratic rule, including calls against the supreme leader Ayatollah, who is Ali Khamenei, show the protests are now very much political. And by the way, that Ayatollah has been in place since the revolution that put the Islamic Republic in place, ousting the Crown Prince and the royal family in 1979. Just happens to be the year of my birth, so I know it's 47 years ago. So exile figures like Reza Pahlavi, who is the former Crown Prince, has made public calls for coordinated demonstrations, boosting morale among some protesters. And the speed of this unrest has been really quite significant. It's nationwide. Strikes all over the place. We talked about bazaar closures and the energy sector striking and youth-led clashes, highlighting a sort of diverse movement, not limited to just one class or profession. And that's really important, because if this was just an economic crisis and people were just upset with the real in their pocket, then they wouldn't be protesting across the demographic in this way. Security forces for the Ayatollah have responded with tear gas, live ammunition and arrests, sometimes with lethal force. At least a dozen of the protesters, including children, have been killed, with hundreds or more detained, according to rights groups. Also reported in The Guardian. Internet blackouts and communication shutdowns have been reported as authorities attempt to curtail the organisation and reporting of this uprising. People power, indeed. So the Iranian government blames external pressures and sanctions, while critics and human rights groups accuse the regime of brutal suppression. US political figures have publicly voiced support for protesters and warned Tehran against further violence. So what could this mean? So officially what this could mean is a continued economic hardship and lack of effective reforms, which would suggest protests may persist or evolve into a more organised resistance, i.e. a revolution. The balance between popular anger on one side and the regime's ability to suppress dissent on the other will shape whether this remains unrest or becomes a larger political rupture. Now, all that's very well and good, but it doesn't really highlight why this isn't getting the exposure myself and many people believe it should. And I think the problem for the mainstream media, particularly with its liberal left agenda, is that Islamism is one of the biggest poles propping up the DEI multiculturalism tent. And these people, Muslim people, just like you and I, human beings, are protesting against the Ayatollah, which is a totalitarian, authoritarian, in many ways fascistic, communistic ruler who has lined his own pockets and the pockets of the elites and will, should this collapse, expose the left's version of what Islam is all about. And that has wide-reaching consequences for many, many people. Let's not forget, Iran, probably one of the richest nations in that part of the Middle East, are propping up and holding the levers for a lot of the unrest in that region. The attacks on Israel, funded by Iran. The attacks on Jewish people, funded by Iran. They want that area to be entirely Islamic. They have no truck for the Jewish people and Christian people alike. Iran, let's not forget, are also aligned with Russia, who have been flying planes into Tehran over the last few weeks. You can see this on any public accessed flight app. They are very much supporters of China, and therefore they have picked their side of the Tier 1 nations. We've spoken about this before. I've spoken about it with Nick, and Nick spoke about it yesterday on the Dixon Cox podcast. There are Tier 1 nations which comprise USA, Russia, and China. And these are nations that can stand alone, defend themselves, and rule the world. Tier 2 nations include Great Britain, large parts of Europe, Saudi, oil-rich nations, etc. And then you go down the tiers. Now, interestingly, Iran, Russia, and China have also been supported by Venezuela up until Maduro was ousted by Donald Trump's administration just last weekend. So as you can see, all of a sudden, the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. That superpower, led by China, is at risk right now, very much at risk. And let me play a scenario out for you. If Trump, now that he's taken Venezuela and its oil, was to take Greenland and its oil and its minerals and have that safe haven military base between the US and Europe and Russia and China, and also for the totalitarian Islamic Republic state of Iran to fall all within the same short period, maybe even within the same month, then this would very much play into the US's hands. And the US would therefore, particularly if they were to take some administration lead within Iran, and I don't know if they would or wouldn't, perhaps it would go back to the Crown Prince, I don't know. But what we would see is more secular view of the world, more westernized view of the world, and probably, I would like to think, a slightly more settled region. Certainly what would happen is all the people that are being funded by Iran and attacking Israel and attacking the West will no longer have their funding, in the same way that those that were being funded by Venezuelan oil are no longer being funded. Now, with those tier 1 nations, US, Russia, China, if you're a Westerner, you have two choices. You either choose the Iran, Russia, China alliance, or you choose the US. Now, presented with that choice, unless you are an absolutely mad, off your head, ultra progressive, socialist, communist, nutter wet wipe, then you are going to choose the US, because the US is going to protect your way of life. So whether you like neoconservatism or not, or neocon as it's known colloquially, or if you hate Donald Trump or not, or if you support Western values, Christianity, etc., or not, if Donald Trump and the US are able to pull off some imperialist revolution by hook or by crook, by luck or otherwise, over this coming period of time, then I think, personally, we are probably a lot safer for the short to medium term. Of course, I'm not stupid, or as stupid as I may sound or look. Obviously, that will ignite a lot of things underground. People will want to seek revenge as a result for this. However, they won't be funded anymore. Donald Trump will have control of the purse strings. Donald Trump will have the land. Donald Trump will be pulling the levers. And so will any well-meaning US president administration from this point on. Now back to Iran. Iran has not always been like this. Many of you will be aware that previous to the revolution in which the Crown Prince was ousted and the Islamic Republic was put in place in 1979, it was a much more secular society, much more akin to what we see today. It was a type of society where women wore dresses and didn't have to cover themselves. They could drive, have jobs in the same way that men could, have almost equality. And religion wasn't the be-all and end-all. And as you can see in some of these pictures here, people looked very much like they were living in a westernized country. Now, this didn't go down particularly well with the type of people that were in charge now and were about then, of course, because the Ayatollah is the same Ayatollah. So, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 was a mass uprising that overthrew the monarchy of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and led to the creation of the Islamic Republic of Iran under the Ayatollah, which we now see today. It remains one of the most influential revolutions of the 20th century. Now, the causes of the revolution aren't that dissimilar from what's causing the uprising today, other than one unique point, and I'll get to that in a minute. So the people of Iran at the time were upset with authoritarian rule. They thought the Shah, the Crown Prince, ruled as an autocrat. Political parties were banned or tightly controlled. They are now, by the way. And the Savak, which was the secret police then, used torture, censorship and surveillance in much the same way as they do now under the Islamic Republic. The economy had its own inequalities, much like it does today. Oil wealth benefited the elites. Inflation, unemployment and rural poverty worsened throughout the 1970s. And the rapid modernisation disrupted the traditional society, by which they mean the traditional Islamic society. The Shia ruled, the Muslim ruled country as it was. There were cultural and religious backlashes because many Iranians saw the Shah, the Crown Prince, as far too westernised. Clergy opposed secular reforms and loss of religious influence. You can imagine if you've got all these high-powered totalitarian Islamic rulers and they haven't got the power because all the power sits with the Crown Prince, they are not going to be too happy with that. And there was resentment, of course, for the US and British influence, which was widespread. You know, let's not make any bones about that. I think they felt there was a loss of legitimacy as well. There was a lot of perceived corruption. The Shah, the Crown Prince, celebrated 2,500 years of the Persian rule of the monarchy, and that was celebrated in 1971. And to many people in Iran in 1971, that symbolised elite success. And, you know, you don't want to see that. You really don't want to see that. So, what will be the global impacts of this? Well, at the moment, it is just an uprising. And all the time it stays that way, the mainstream legacy media will continue to tell us that that's all it is. And it's very convenient for them because this country and the mainstream legacy media have perpetuated and peddled this multiculturalism fantasy now for 2 or 3 decades. And not only is it starting to fail in the UK, one of the key principles is starting to fail around the world also. And coinciding with that, Donald Trump, a white straight man of the US, the big imperialists, are starting to take charge. This is not what many people, including Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, the Greens, Zach Polanski, Macron, von der Leyen, you name it, the WEF, the Davos gang, they didn't see this as part of their world order plan. The tectonic plates of superpowers are shifting in a direction perhaps they didn't see, or if they did see, they refused to believe it was coming. And it would appear that, because I don't really believe in coincidences, that Donald Trump's administration saw a lot of this coming long before many other people, which is why he has got ahead of the curve. I don't like to see this level of instability. I think it's a worry. But I also think that you have to break a few eggs to make an omelette. And I support, from that tier 1 group, the US. I share the same sensibilities, the same values. I believe that LGB people should be able to live the life they want to live. You try and live that life in Tehran, you'll get chucked off a building. I know it's an old adage, but it's true. Our Western values are being crumbled by our own leadership. And they are totally confused now about what is going to happen. So that uncertainty is going to breed all sorts of unsettling stories in certain parts of the media. But watch carefully. Because much like in Venezuela, as is happening in Tehran and throughout the provinces in Iran today, and will continue to happen, is there a great celebration and uprising at the possibility of a bright new future. And that's important to pay heed to. Unless you believe that it is the people, the elites, the few people in power that absolutely know everything and should be telling them what to do. I don't. Now you could argue that's what Donald Trump's doing. But at least if Donald Trump's doing it, he's doing it with the US values, which are aligned with ours. And therefore, if the outcome is that the US are in charge for a lot longer than we thought they were going to be, and Russia and China are parked to one side, and Iran can't blow the living crap out of Israel, and Venezuela can't fund any of that, well, so be it. That's what I say. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to listen to this. I'm no expert. Obviously, I relied very much on media outlets, GB News, ChatGPT, Grok, and all those things to get me up to speed. But maybe if you weren't enlightened, you are now to some degree. Thanks very much for listening. Please like, share and subscribe. Share with your friends. Tell them all about Paul Cox. Go across to my Substack at Paul Cox Comedy, as it is at Instagram, Facebook and X at Paul Cox Comedy on every platform. I'm on 6.3 thousand subscribers on YouTube now, and I've earned that since the middle of December. I'm very pleased with that. Thank you very much for your support. I'm on the road to 10k and only you can help me get there. So please keep supporting me. Thank you. Until next time, keep it real.